Hello, beautiful people. It's Louisa again with another video about the weird and wacky world of voices. And today I want to share with you an explanation of how a repressed emotion can become a voice. So this is not the case for all voices. I'm not saying that all voices are repressed emotions, but oftentimes there is an element of that voice that is containing a repressed emotion, or it is outrightly associated with that repressed emotion. So in other words, your voices may definitely be dissociated parts of self that have been sent underground, exiled from the psyche due to painful experiences often in childhood, but not always. And many people and studies have shown this, especially the studies of Dr. Marius Romm and Dr. Sandra Escher. They have shown that trauma and voices, there's a strong correlation. So their studies found that 70% of voice hearers start to hear voices following a traumatic event in their lives. So that's the big capital T type traumas, painful things that people can definitely identify. And then you've got a whole lot of other people that may have experienced what I call little t traumas. So traumas that kind of went under the radar, difficult things in childhood that we really couldn't cope with at the time, but we didn't have any sort of option but to just get on with life and paste it over, right? So the mechanism of repressing negative, painful experiences and emotions is an unconscious one. It just happens. So you may not even realize that you've done it. And this is hopefully this little diagram I'm going to show you is going to explain how that happens and how it becomes a voice and what to do about it. So if you will bear with me, I will share my little slide that I have. Okay, so this extremely exciting diagram you can see. I do struggle to draw on a computer with my mouse, so forgive the terrible stick figure here, but this is a person, as you can tell. Now, this person, and it may be a child, but it could also be an adult, something negative, painful, bad happens to this person. And I'm representing that by a red heart. The heart is the symbol of feelings here, not necessarily love, but just feelings in general. So, and the color red for the pain. Okay, so something happens that is painful, painful experience and feelings that happen. Now, if somebody has a painful experience and feelings that are overwhelming, and the person doesn't receive a soothing or adequate response from people around them, especially if they're a child, because children have to learn how to self-regulate, they have to learn how to manage difficult emotions. So if there's no adult to kind of hold space for that painful feeling, or if they're already an adult, this person, and the painful feeling is overwhelming and they themselves are not resourced enough to cope with it at the time, they are not going to be able to integrate that painful feeling. In other words, they're not going to be able to accept it, feel it, process it, and in that cycle, ultimately release it or even and understand it. That's another component of integration. So what will happen instead is that that emotion is going to go underground. It's going to get repressed. And what I probably should draw here is a little line. Okay, there you go. So there's a little line just to say, just to show the demarcation, which is repression. So repression is we have shoved it away into our unconscious, our subconscious, and we are not really aware of it anymore. Now, that feeling is going to try to come up because it ultimately wants to be released from our field, from our energy field and our emotional body. And it'll get triggered, and that's when you'll know it's there. You'll feel this weird, like, ugh, feeling whenever something similar happens that originally triggered the painful event, or when you just become conscious of it. You might have a dream that reminds you of it. There are ways that that painful feeling can kind of bubble up, right? It could even be just a vague kind of discomfort or anxiety that you're feeling. but you really can't put your finger on the emotion itself or even the reason why. So that's repression. Now, if that happens long enough, you can imagine that that feeling starts to get angry. If a feeling could get angry, remember, it's actually a part of you. It's a part of you that experienced that negative emotion. So by repressing it, you were not honoring, you're not respecting, you're not validating that part. And so the part starts to get angry, upset, grief, shame, lots and lots of feelings. But I just generally made it anger because that's certainly one of the emotions that will be created from this complex, as you can see. So let's imagine now that that painful feeling and that part of you that's being repressed is starting to get angry because it hasn't been heard. Next, what happens is that we start to dissociate that feeling, right? Because it's not feeling very nice. So what happens is we actually commit a kind of a psychic surgery, like we cut it out of our awareness altogether. And I've represented that here by the diminishing color of the heart, right? So it's getting blacker and angrier and kind of festering. And you can also see that it's growing. I've made it bigger than the original feeling. So it's growing because the painful feeling needs somewhere to go. And it's by repressing it, it's actually gaining in power. So I've depicted that as painful feelings dissociated, right? So by this stage, when you're at this point of repressing and then dissociating your emotion, you won't even recognize it as being there. It's wiped from your memory. You've got this kind of amnesia, and that line depicts that amnesia. And at this point, it is really angry now, or really uncomfortable, or really distressed. So the energy, emotions are energy, has to go somewhere. And this is how that feeling can start to become a voice. It can start to actually arise from your subconscious as thoughts or very intrusive thoughts. If you're highly sensitive to subtle realms, it can feel as if it's coming from outside of you, like you might even hear it through your ears. But mostly people who experience dissociated voices are hearing them inside their heads as if they're very loud thoughts kind of on high volume. And you can see here that the voice, I've drawn that as bigger than the person themselves. So there's a sense of the voice is more powerful. And the voice, being a repressed emotion, knows exactly how to trigger your buttons because it is a feedback loop from the original wound that you had. So let me try and explain in my own story, if that makes sense. So for myself, what happened was my wounds were the kind of little T traumas. So they were wounds associated with having my voice shut down, being told I shouldn't be angry. And I learned very early on as a little girl that it wasn't okay to express my anger, to assert my boundaries, that I felt that I would get punished for that or have love withdrawn from my parents, who, like any typical parents on this planet, would try their absolute best and had no real idea around the providing for the emotional needs in that era. So this is kind of the 1970s. I think we have, actually progressed a lot, and parents are in many cases more aware of this stuff than they were back then. But there's a whole cohort of people on the planet who did not receive emotional regulation. And I don't like to blame parents because it's just nobody's fault in a sense. We're all inheriting trauma from our parents before. And I just say that as a kind of a caveat around what I'm describing here. But suffice to say that anger wasn't allowed in my family, really, or at least I didn't feel that I could be angry. So I had to repress those emotions. And then as time went on, um, unconsciously, again, it's just a way to kind of create safety for yourself and function in the family and in the society, because not only do parents have these rules around emotions, society does as well. So, a lot of societies on our planet repress certain emotions. And that can also lead to this complex. So gradually over time, I just dissociated completely from my anger. And you'll know that you're dissociating from anger because you'll say things like, I never get angry, right? And this is quite common for women because women, it's more acceptable, I guess, for a woman to divert her anger into emotions like anxiety and grief. And so I noticed that when I was angry, I was actually crying. I would dissolve into tears and get very upset and I'd completely bypass the anger. So for me, how it played out is that when I was growing up, I didn't feel that anger was a permissible emotion to express in my family. So it's not that anyone explicitly told me that. It was role modeled. It was also in the broader society that I grew up in. It's also in the ancestors of the English, the Germanic, the South African kind of mentality around emotions. And it was also a patriarchal thing. So girls in particular had to be nice and sweet all the time. And so if I got angry, it would be essentially punished. And, even subtle punishments like being sent to your room or having love withheld or, stonewalling, that kind of like not overt punishment. But even those, what would appear to be minor punishments, was enough to set up as a very young child a natural tendency to repress my anger, to just simply not feel it. And then over time, life experiences taught me that standing up for myself, which is the good side of anger, right? Assertiveness, that would get me into trouble. So I would try to do it, let's say in the playground with children, and find that other people were mean in response. So I collapsed into a kind of fawning response, which is a nervous system survival coping strategy, which is to people please. And when you're a people pleaser, by the time you develop this trait, you are going to find it really hard to tap into your anger and get angry with people. Yeah. So that anger is going to be first repressed and then dissociated. And for some people, that kind of cycle will create anger against self. And you can see in that drawing that I did, the the anger is now turned against you. The anger is angry at you for repressing it, if that makes sense. For some people, it will be voices. For other people, it will be self-sabotage of all sorts of nature is a kind of anger at self. It can be self-harm. It can be eating disorders. It can be addictions of any kind. It can be even as sort of less obvious as success sabotage. So you might be wanting to save up money for something, and then all of a sudden you go and blow all your money. So you're not like caring for yourself. You're sabotaging the things you really want. Even lack of self-care can be a way of expressing anger against self. So I'm just giving you a broad sort of understanding of how many varieties and interesting ways that this dynamic can manifest, but specifically for voice hearers, it can come out as a voice, a very angry voice. So if your voices are holding a particular emotion, and this is the question, it's not just about anger, it could be about any emotion. Think about the emotions that your voice holds and ask yourself, okay, how is that? Is that an emotion that I feel comfortable to express? Or have I dissociated from that? Have I allowed this voice to take on the burden essentially of feeling that emotion for me because for some reason it wasn't safe? It wasn't safe back then when I very first felt it, and remembering that it can grow over time. And Carl Jung called these energy complexes, these kind of parts of the self or voices. They are accumulated energy that hasn't been allowed to release. So then the question is, what do we do about that? How can we heal that? And the answer really lies in dissolving that wall that was between yourself and your voice. Dissolving it means beginning, first of all, to accept it, to understand that it may be a dissociated part of self. And that in itself is healing because prior to that, you might have been resisting this voice and fighting it and thinking it's evil and not understanding where it comes from. So that very first glimmer of acceptance of the voice is useful because it starts to dissolve. It starts to kind of soften the opposition, the polarization that has been set up in your psyche, the conflict, the war between me and it. So that starts to dissolve really nice through just accepting it. Okay, this could be a repressed emotion, a dissociated emotion, a dissociated part of self. And then we work with that. We start to do, there's lots and lots of tools, but it's beginning to actually create a relationship with this part of self. We can do this through journaling. You can invite in that angry part to talk to you and just let it go. Let it be uncensored. Anger in your journal. What does it want to say? What does it want to tell you? And making kind of compassionate space to listen to that. If it's very abusive towards you, then you can limit the time and just go, okay, I'm going to do this for like 3 pages or 1 page or 10 minutes or whatever it is. And then I'm going to shut that book and get on with something else. Or you might express the feelings through art. That could feel a little safer. You have to like work with your own capacity here and find things that feel just challenging enough to start breaking down and dissolving those walls of resistance, but not so challenging that's going to totally freak you out and, cause you to lose function and collapse. So little bit by little bit, what I did is I learned to express my anger. And unfortunately, in the beginning, I expressed it in very destructive ways. And I've made some videos about that, about self-harm and other, very potent ways of releasing that anger. But I kind of learned, especially with the help of my therapist that I was working with at the time, to release the anger in safe ways. So I won't go into all details of ways you can do that, just to keep this video short. But if that's something that you're interested in seeing more content on, please let me know. And I would also love to hear from you down in the comments below. Do you relate to this video? Do you feel that your voice is a repressed associated emotion? And how have you dealt with it? And what can you share with the community that would be helpful? So if you like this video, please subscribe, please make a comment, and yeah, let me know down in the comments below. Love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Bye.